Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. As you can see from the title, today's video is going to be a selection of books that made me cry. I thought about this as sort of like a series of videos that I wanted to do, so over the next however long, um, every so often I'm going to pop up a wee video that will be books that made me something. Uh, I'm already looking at titles of books that made me laugh. I possibly want to do a video that is going to be books that made me stand up, which for my what I mean by that is books that I picked up, that I was reading, something happens that I have to put the book down for a minute and stand up and either stomp about the house angrily or go make myself a cup of tea and calm down or do a little dance because oh my god, I can't believe that just happened, that sort of thing. But for today we're going to focus on books that made me cry because I'm a sucker for something that makes me cry. And because if a book makes me cry, that means that it had some really, really incredible characterizations going on. It means I got really invested in the characters and that the emotions were just so high and beautiful. So I've got a selection of one, two, three, four, six, seven books to have a quick chat with you about today. Excuse me. So the first one, I don't have a physical copy because I did read it from the library, but I will get a physical copy one day because I do intend to read this book again. But that is A Man Called Uve. A Man Called Uve was actually the very first book I reviewed on this channel. It was my very first video, was a reading vlog for A Man Called Uve. So I will link it down below for anyone who wants to go have a nosy. Maybe you can see how far I've come along since then. But A Man Called Uve was just absolutely beautiful. It was so emotional. It was just packed with emotion and incredible character interactions. It is basically the story of a grumpy old man living in Sweden who has recently lost his wife and is basically trying to tie up his loose ends before he can take his own life and go and join his wife because he doesn't see the point in being here. Um, as I've just mentioned, there is that suicide trigger warning. If that's not something you're comfortable reading about, don't read this book. But whilst all this is happening, new neighbours move into the street who sort of like start to connect with Uwe, very much against Uwe's will. He just wants to be left alone. But you just see this community, as the story progresses, you see this community come together, not only for Uwe, but for other people on the street and in the community. And it is just such a heartwarming tale of the beauty of humanity, I think. It just shows that there's so much awful in this world. But you know what? There are some really good people too. And I absolutely loved it. The last 20, 30 pages or so took me about an hour to read. And it should have only taken me about half an hour because literally tears were streaming and I couldn't see. I physically could not see for tears. I was proper snotty, blubbering mess. Like 10 out of 10 recommends. If I could give it 6 out of 5 stars, I would give it 6 out of 5 stars. But Storygraph only lets me give it 5. So, hugely recommend those ones. So, the next one I want to show you is The High Lord by Trudy Canavan. Now, this is the third book in the Black Magician trilogy. I almost never hear this trilogy spoken about on BookTube. It's not exactly new anymore. I first read this. I was still in high school when I first read this. As you can see from my copies, they're a little bit worn out now. And this is my second set of copies. I read these every other year, every couple of years, because I absolutely love these. These were one of the first fantasy series, it's a trilogy, that I picked out for myself. Sorry, excuse me, sniffing as usual. Basically, up until sort of like this point, a lot of the books in fantasy, I was reading a fair amount of fantasy at this point, but a lot of it was sort of like picked out with my mum or on my mum's recommendation, or basically, Amy, take this book, shut up and go read. um, so this is one of the first. So I think it resonated me a bit because it was one of the first ones that I chose for myself. I read all three books in the space of 2 days because back when I was a 14, 15-year-old, I could do that. um, but yeah, I absolutely fell in love with the characters, and towards the end, we don't have a full blown war, but there is a battle going on in and around the city. You're seeing. I think it was one of the first ones that showed me that a war and a battle doesn't have to be giant armies, that individuals can do more damage or can do just as much damage. Um, but it was one of the first books I read where not everyone I expected to survive survived. Now I know that's a wee bit of a spoiler, but yeah, there were people passed away. People died. Favorite characters died, and this was in the first book where it was like there was a character who I was indifferent towards at the start of the trilogy, and I absolutely adored by the end of this book. By the start of this book, really, I was adoring this character, and yeah, this character did not survive, and I was an inconsolable mess. I don't understand why this book doesn't get spoken about as much. I freaking adore Trudy Canavan. Um, I own everything she's written. I've only got 2 books left in the Millennial Rule Quartet to read. She's just. We need to speak about Trudy more often. Give Trudy some love. So, the next book that made me cry is. Where am I going to go to? Let's talk about you. This was one of the first books I read once I finished uni. So I was 21. I'd just moved back in with my parents. And yeah, this book made me realise how fortunate I was to have such a loving family. And how fortunate I was to be born when I am and where I am. And yeah, this was one of the first books that opened my eyes. But basically, it opened my eyes to racism and to the hardships that people of colour have to overcome. And it was one of the first books that made me start thinking. And I think it's one of those books that, in theory, I should read in. Like, you can be made to read in school. And I think if I'd been made to read this in school, I would not have taken nearly as much away from it. But that is The Colour Purple by Alice Walker. I cried for most of this book, to be honest. Celie is just such an incredible, incredible character. She's just an incredible person, and just I have so much admiration for her inner strength, which throughout so much of it she herself doesn't think she has. And just she has to overcome so much. And yeah, this is one of the first books. I mean, predominantly I'd read at this point pretty much only epic fantasy. This was one of the first non-fantasy I read as an adult. Still technically a young adult at that point, but yeah, until then it had been very much kids' books, and then I transitioned into fantasy. So this was one of the first non-fantasy books I read, and it just really, even now, so this, 11 years later, I read it a couple of times since, and it's one of the first books that it stays with you. And I know I'm not articulating this very well, but I tend to find that when I start crying over this book, I'm not crying over what's happened to Celie, although it is horrific what she has to go through. But I cry for Celie herself, and that she goes through so much, and that at times she thinks so little of herself, but she overcomes so much. And she is so strong and just so inspirational at times. And yeah, I feel like this is a book everybody should read. And I hate being that person like, you have to read this book, because when I'm told I have to read a book because of the messages it gives me and how important it is, I tend to shy away from them. But this is a book I think that will stick with me for life. And I am so glad I read it. Okay. The next book, like, nothing about this is going to be cheery because these are all books that made me cry. But yeah, The next one is Little Women. I read this every Christmas and I cry every Christmas. I actually didn't read it this Christmas. I don't know why, but yeah. Um, so my copy of Little Women, I've got Little Women, which obviously follows into Good Wives. I know you get some of them where Little Women and Good Wives are combined. So when I talk about Little Women, I mean the combination of the two. I think most of us who've read this know why I cry so much at this book. There's just one particular scene, well, several scenes, but I think I love the relationship between the sisters, particularly Jo and Beth. I adore Beth. Beth is just such a sweetheart, and yeah. I think one of the few episodes of Friends that I've ever watched involved Joy putting this in the freezer, and I was with you, Joy, like, put that book in the freezer. Because, yeah. Oh, you get so attached to the characters of these Little Women, and you know what? It doesn't always work out for them. But they're brilliant. They're lovely people. And I don't know, I read this every Christmas because it is such a comforting read. It's such a lovely read. But it's gonna tug at your heartstrings. Louisa May Alcott knows how to tug at your heartstrings. Yeah. So, I've only spoken about 4 books so far. Let's speed this up a little bit if I can. The next one. The next one is The Unlikely Pilgrimage of Harold Fry. This, again, I read this years ago. I've read it a few times. I don't know if it really comes across. It's all water damaged because I've dropped it in the bath once or twice. It's, yeah. It is the only book of Rachel Joyce that I have read. I did try to read, I can't even remember the title, something to do with a music shop, and I could not get into it. So she's an author that either really works for me or really doesn't work for me, I think. But The Unlikely Pilgrimage of Harold Fry is basically about this little old retired man who one day receives a letter from an old friend from way, way back. And in this letter is basically her saying goodbye because she's dying. And so I think he goes to the post box to reply, and just as he goes to post his letter, he's like, do you know what? No, I'm just going to go to her. So right there, in the snap of a moment, he just starts walking. Now, Harold lives... I can't remember exactly where Harold lives, but he basically lives down towards the south of England. His friend lives... I think Queenie is his friend's name. She lives... I really want to say Berwick upon Tweed, but she lives, like, up near the borders. And Harold walks the length of the country. And it is the story of determination and trying to right wrongs. And as he goes, he gathers followers. Folks start trying to fundraise because literally he just starts walking from that post box. He doesn't prepare anything. He's basically... I don't want to say he's wearing his slippers, but he's not wearing hiking shoes. He's not wearing appropriate footwear. He doesn't have a jacket on. And yeah, he basically, by the miraculous kindness of strangers, he frequently finds somewhere to sleep, but often he doesn't. He just keeps walking. But all the while this is happening, his wife is back at home, frantic, no idea where he's gone. And just, I can't say too much about what happens towards the end and the revelations that we come across because it would be very spoilery. But as you're going along, you are starting to tweak that, like, something's not quite right here, both with Harold and with his wife. And yeah, by the end you're like, oh gods. And it is such a bittersweet, heartwarming story that, yeah, towards the end I was proper tearing up. Not quite full blown Man Called Uve sobbing, but like proper, really touched at that heartstrings, like, oh god, those kind of reactions and emotions. I can feel myself tearing up slightly, actually. as a result of just thinking about what happens towards the end. But yeah, at its heart, it is about righting wrongs, and not righting wrongs, but making amends and doing what you think is right. Um, and it's just a beautiful story of some of the kindness of humans and the humanity. So I would definitely recommend picking up The Unlikely Pilgrimage of Harold Fry. I was also running at the time, and although Harold is only walking, this was great motivation. It's like, well, come on, if Amy, I'd be going out for my run, not wanting to. I'd be like, well, you know what, Amy, if Harold can just keep pushing himself and keep walking, because this man is in like his 70s, 80s. You can go out for a 5K. I finished the book and then stopped running. And then I've only got two left. So the next one is Assassin's Fate. This is book 1, 2, 3, 15, 16 in the realm of the Elderlings. It is the third book in the Fits and the Fool trilogy. Do not recommend reading these out of order. You do very much have to read the series in order. You can go from Live Ships to Farseer, or Farseer to Live Ships. I would always recommend Farseer first for full impact. But this book made me cry because I am a huge Robin Hobb fan, and Fitz and the Fool are my favourite dynamic. I absolutely adore them. I was over the moon when she announced that she was releasing this new trilogy several years ago now. And yeah, this book is the culmination of everything. Within this, we see. So basically, up until this trilogy, so like the Farseer trilogy and the Tawny Man were together, kind of. You had the Live Ships, and you had the Dragon books. And they were always in the same realm, and they all had slight intertwinings, but they were all very much their own thing. In this book, they all come together, and it is beautiful. I freaking adore this trilogy. This gave me so many scenes that as a fan, I wanted but never dreamt I would get. Certain characters met, and oh my gosh, their meeting was everything I wanted it to be. But yeah, this was everything. However, the way she ended it, Robin Hobb has ended this trilogy, this particular trilogy, in such a way that I am very unlikely. I'm not saying I will never see them again, but it's very, very unlikely that I will see certain characters again. I'm not going to get another trilogy for them with these characters in it. The ending was satisfying. It was everything I needed it to be, and it was beautiful. But I had to say goodbye, and it very much, unlike, I don't know how to say unlike, but more so than the way she's ended previous trilogies, this one, it felt final. And as a long-time fan, now I first read Robin Hobb when I was 13 or 14. So yeah, I've been a fan for 18 plus years now. As a long-term fan, to end this trilogy and go, oh, I'm not getting, oh, I am properly starting to tear up now just thinking about it, because it was such a fitting ending that it was, yeah. Robin Hobb knows how to write characters. She knows how to make you very, very attached to characters. And whilst I am so happy for, am I happy for them? I don't know if I'm happy for them. Whilst I appreciate the ending, and I'm glad they got the ending they got, it made sense, and it was just so fitting, and yeah. I thought I could articulate this better than I am, but I'm really struggling to. So all I'm going to say is that if you are reading through the realm of the elderlings and you are absolutely loving your ride, but you've already started to experience how much of an emotional roller coaster it is, make sure you've got your hankies ready for the end of Assassin's Fate. Or basically just this entire book. Because you're gonna need them. Right? And now the last book I wanted to talk to you about is a book I've not actually finished reading, and it's the only non-fiction I have on this book, in this pile. I finish every chapter angry at humanity, terrified at the thought that this happened. I have to remind myself that I'm not reading horror fiction, because I don't read horror fiction. This actually happened. This book is based on the real hidden diaries of a Jew who went to Auschwitz. And that is the boy who followed his father into Auschwitz. This is an extremely difficult read. Extremely difficult read. And it should be. And I'm glad it is. Because if this ever becomes an easy read for me, then I am terrified for myself and I'm taking myself to a doctor because I definitely need therapy. Because this should not be an easy read. It starts in Vienna in 1930 with the Kleinman family all living together, all going about their business. They own the father owns a store. And you see how it goes from normal everyday life to just how the general public turned, and that the propaganda was so well done. Just that mob mentality, you see it developing, and you see how life for this family goes from normal to completely ostracized by their friends and family. Not their family, obviously, but like from their friends and their community. Like long-term childhood friendships completely break down. From there, we've seen the family being rounded up. We've seen they've been separated. The father and son are now they are not in Auschwitz, they are in Buchenwald. And I'm now learning about the sheer atrocities that happened to them and how they were treated. So I don't know what education is like about World War II now, because obviously I've been out of compulsory education, mandatory education for a few years now. But my memories of it, we studied World War II in first and second year. And I think we did some more in standard grade, which is third and fourth year. So in Scotland, that means I was 13, 14, 15 when I was doing it. But we're told that Jews were rounded up, sent to concentration camps, and then put into gas chambers. And that's pretty much the extent of it. This is incredibly eye-opening. That I think just the way I was taught, and just I think between the way I was taught, what we were taught, and just how much I retained, it's almost like I knew torture happened, but it didn't click that it happened. I almost had like this idea in my head that, they went into the concentration camps and were like immediately herded into gas chambers. And that in itself is horrific enough. But it's so far from what happened. Like, so much happened in those concentration camps before the gas chambers. And this is showing me how I'm finding this book a real struggle to read. I'm determined to finish it because it deserves to be read. And it's a book that I feel I need to read because it's definitely showing me how little I know and how much I should know. But I've only read 5 chapters so far, and I read a chapter and then I have to go like a month or two between chapters to just kind of process how much is going on. Um, because I have to remind myself that this is not a horror. This is not fiction. And that is terrifying. That is truly terrifying. Yeah. And yeah, I leave every chapter angry, and then angry that this happened, terrified that this happened, and then absolutely, like, I practically cry almost every chapter because this actually happened. Yeah. So I'm going to end it there on that very, very low note. But yeah, I think what I would say is if at any point you ever want to learn more about what happens, this is I'm currently finding this a very good starting point. Yeah. So yeah, there you have it. These were my books that made me cry. This video went on a little longer than I expected it to, but hey ho, apparently I had things to say about them. Yeah, next video will be a little bit more upbeat. Next video in this series, I don't think it will be the next video I release, but yeah, the next one I want to do, like I said previously, is books that made me laugh. So books that I found that as I was reading them, I was genuinely giggling out loud. Sometimes at the lunch table at work, getting some very weird looks from my colleagues. Or, yeah. So yeah, if you have any recommendations for videos in the series that you want to see me do, let me know. And share with me books that made you cry, because I love books that make me emotional. So yeah, let me know. Pop it in the comments. And I will see you guys in the next video. Bye!